Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm glad we can meet on Zoom. I know this has been a really tough year for community events. So the point of our meeting tonight, it's our annual business meeting for Congress Park neighbors, and we have two business items that we're going to need to address. So first, let me introduce you to the other board members. I'm the president, Vicki Epler. Our treasurer is Miles Tangelin, and our secretary is Tom Connis. Maggie Price is also on the board, and Jeff Harbaugh is our newest board member. Wendy Moraski is also on the board, but I don't think she's going to be able to be with us tonight. Hi, Beth. Thanks for joining us. So there's two matters of business that we need to discuss. One is the bylaws. RNOs were started in 1979 by the city as a way of exchanging information between the city and the neighborhoods. And we have certain standards that we have to rise to be recognized as an RNO. We're a 501c3, and your dues are what help us cover our operating costs and do some of the projects we do around the neighborhood. The RNO board is completely volunteer people. So the revisions that we've looked at in the bylaws, and they've been published on our website for review, we changed the number of members that needed to be present to have a quorum. The city requires there be 12 voting members present, and we adopted that. We revised the voting rules to allow to use SurveyMonkey or some other kind of online voting mechanism that we could use to vote on various topics, as well as having official meetings, online meetings. We redefined the composition of what would be a board of directors. The city requires 3, and we have 3. There's other positions that could be filled, like vice president, but currently we have a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. We redefined how committees would work and utilize the Congress Park Neighbors email to promote various things. And we redefined how elections would be conducted. We also require that any copyrighted material only be used by board members or by those that were approved by the board. The second item on the business agenda is the re-election of the board of directors that I just introduced you to. So by way of explaining what we have done over the last year and what we plan to do in 2021, I'm going to spend a minute talking about that. And then our board members are going to speak to you about what they do and what they've done. I'm sure you're all aware, we've just been through the ECAP planning challenge. So for the last year, we've spent a great deal of time organizing meetings specifically for Congress Park. These are the bylaw changes Maggie has pulled up for you. The highlighted parts are where we made changes. So for 2021, we have two more very large city zoning topics that are going to be coming up, one involving group housing and missing middle housing amendments. And those are going to be presented starting sometime in the spring. And again, we will be organizing meetings with the city agencies, as well as trying to keep everyone informed about which websites and what changes, and connect people with the right city official to get their questions answered. In the past, we have sponsored community building events like public gatherings. Our ice cream social, of course, was one of the biggest ones. And we haven't been able to do that this year, but in the meantime, we're going to use Zoom meetings, and hopefully sometime in the future, we'll be able to go back to public meetings. We publish a quarterly newsletter, and we maintain a website and a Facebook page. We always appreciate when neighbors are willing to contribute content and help with delivery of newspapers, and we'll continue to do that. Those are the places where we can post the most current renditions of what we get from the city about changing and zoning laws and amendments and planning changes and upcoming meetings. And Maggie has been responsible for all of that. We sponsor the Green Team, which Tara Tull heads, and we also have a Historic Preservation Committee to help with the interface between all these new changes in our neighborhood, and because we have a historic neighborhood, to help educate neighbors about that. We have a lot of information from Discover Denver and the survey they just did, and we're going to bring that forward over the next year. We hold meetings every other month to provide neighbors with ongoing information regarding projects and updates in the neighborhood. The pool will be under construction next summer, as well the Congress Park Playground renovation. So we're going to want to be bringing you information on that. We, at our every other month meetings, we have crime reports, updates on street constructions and closures, and updates from the stakeholders on various committees that they serve on. We're going to support Snow Angels, which our newest member, Jeff Harbour, is running, and he can speak to you a little bit about that. We have a desire to increase membership, particularly among people who don't own property or local business owners in the neighborhood. We try really hard to represent all the people that live in Congress Park. So you as neighbors can encourage your neighbors to get involved. It's a really helpful resource, particularly right now with so many changes going on. We work closely with schools. We have 3 schools in our neighborhood. Teller, we like to support the backpack program, which provides food for families. Sewell, which has been incredibly supportive in providing places for a gym for us to meet in, and Good Shepherd as well. And we want to promote their activities. Now I'm going to ask the board members to speak for a minute about what they've done and are going to be doing for the board. I would urge you to utilize the chat if you have a particular neighborhood issue that you would like us to get you more information on, follow up on, work on, enter it in the chat, and we will try to get back to you about what we know or can do about it, or any questions that you have. Miles, why don't you start off and talk about your role?
Hi everyone, I'm glad you're here. I'm going to do a quick treasurer's report just to let you know how we're doing. I'm sorry, but my video camera is not working.
Okay.
But thanks to your generous support for Congress Park neighbors and the income generated by our newsletter business advertisers, I'm expecting Congress Park neighbors to basically break even this year. And that's actually better than I was expecting, because based on COVID, you know, we had the big crash that happened earlier this year. So we actually discounted newsletters for our long-term advertisers to just give them a break. And they've continued to advertise with us. So that was actually quite successful. We also this year gave money to Teller PTA, and we're planning on figuring out which institutions we would like to support in the future. That will be one among many. And I just wanted to touch on, we did have some money donated from our former District 10 City Council member, Wayne New. He would always attend our meetings, and he really listened to our concerns, and he provided insight from his viewpoint as a council member. So what he had done back in like 2017 was he paid for a funding of a traffic study before the East Central Area Plan started. So he basically donated $9,500 to have that study completed. And then during his last year, he donated another $15,000 to help us with preservation of our historically significant neighborhood as surveyed by Discover Denver. So we have that money earmarked for a future preservation or historical district or whatever tool the neighborhood decides it wants to use. They've been recommending there may be different tools, so we just have that to hire a consultant to help us. And also, Wayne also donated money for a street pop-up. It was never installed, so we still have $9,900 earmarked for that. And so what we may be doing is sending out a request to all of you if there is some type of a street improvement that we could allocate that money to. We would like to keep that basically focused on some type of street safety. So between all three of those, Wayne New basically has donated to Congress Park about $34,400, which is substantial. And I don't know if it's just that because he lived in Cherry Creek and a single family home that he related to us in some fashion. And he understood when we brought these concerns up about preservation before the planning, the ECAP planning had begun, that the impact on us, because we're a majority single family residential neighborhood, would be direct and would impact all of us. So I have to say, I do miss those days of having an advocate for our neighborhood who would listen and provide support for us. And just a quick feedback from what Vicki was talking about. Without all of our volunteer work and the volunteers who deliver the newsletter, who provide articles, give us feedback, and your support, as well as people filling out the surveys, we really couldn't do what we're doing now. So we do really thank all of you, and I thank the other board members and volunteers. And so the other, just stepping on to some other things that are happening in the neighborhood. So recently, Vicki and I are on the Congress Park Playground Advisory Group, and that has been linked to the renovation, or actually the rebuilding of the Congress Park pool. And the Parks Department came up with extra money to actually redo the playground and provide sidewalks. So it's kind of amazing that they were able to find funding for that. So they did that as part of the renovation. And then the other committee I've been involved with recently along those same lines is the Public Art Selection Committee. So there was public money for the pool, so of course they've got to do a percentage for art. So we're on a short list currently, but we're going to have a couple of art pieces for the new pool and playground. So that's pretty exciting. Also, Vicki and I are on the Congress Park Preservation Committee, and we're going to base some of our work on the new Discover Denver survey, which basically said most of Congress Park is architecturally significant, historically architecturally significant. And so we want to use that report as a basis to start that conversation with all of you as to what that might look like, what types of preservation, because there are some Denver plans coming forward that could radically change our single family neighborhood. Basically, with those zoning changes, right now, the East Central Area Plan recommends missing middle housing. Missing middle housing is basically defined as duplex, triplex, and quadplex. And this is being recommended on all single family zoning in our neighborhood. So that includes everyone except the historically designated areas. And with that being, as a policy being recommended, the next piece to come is the Denver infill, and that's going to start next year. And they're going to define what type of context those type of homes will be in. So to be clear about this, there will be no more single family zoning in the city of Denver. This new text amendment is changing that, and Blueprint Denver requires missing middle housing in all low density single family homes. So just be aware that is what is coming. And the concern we have is if you incentivize somebody tearing down a single family home to build multifamily, the numbers really do work. And with us having a historically significant context throughout the whole neighborhood, you could start seeing bungalows with large lots torn down. There are some preservation protections, but that's basically only the front of the house. So there's some real concerns moving forward for single family areas. And other things, I also I also participate with Denver INC with Maggie. And they're actually looking at, that's the Denver Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation. It's a citywide R&O. And I participate with the zoning and planning. And again, the city's got group living and residential care. They'll be voting on that next year, which redefines how many people can live in a dwelling unit. And the other new thing coming up is reform for registered neighborhood organizations. So Congress Park Neighbors is an R&O, and it has been made clear to me that I'm not really sure what they're trying to address, but the city wants to reform the R&Os, and that would be us. I'm not sure if it's because we're asking questions or want additional information about what's being proposed, but for whatever reason, they want to reform the R&Os, and it was actually, that information was placed in the East Central Area Plan itself. And I know, it's my understanding Councilman Hines supports this R&O reform. I'm not sure what it means. It's concerning, but that's also moving forward. And then again, we've got the Denver infill, which will be starting next year. And that's going to change single family zoning into multifamily. And during the planning department, they told the planners to put everything on the table, including smaller lots, subdividing lots, to get as much density as possible. So I'm not really sure where that's going to go or how that's going to end up, but it would be a concern for Congress Park, which is the majority of single family zoning. And also I just completed the East Central steering committee for ECAP, and that had been going on for the last 3 years. The other things that are happening is Vicki and I also participate with the Denver Botanic Gardens Neighborhood Advisory Committee. And this year they just completed their final master plan building, which is the Friar Newman Center. And it's wonderful. And it's again, the last of their master plan buildings. And it's just amazing to have that type of facility in our neighborhood. The only other thing is Colfax Connects, Colfax BRTs moving forward. I've been participating with that for like the last 6 or 7 years. I really am not sure what's happening. I've not gotten any emails from them, but they are working on the CDs and they plan on requesting money from the federal government to move forward with their construction. So that's basically what I've been doing lately. Thank you.
Tom, can you give us some information about membership?
Hi, I'm Tom Konis. I can give you a bunch of information. Membership is pretty much maintaining steady. I haven't seen an increase or a decrease. Seems like we have the same group of people who continually support us, unless they move out of the neighborhood. I also distribute the newsletters. I'm the recording secretary for the organization, and I also maintain the membership rolls. So those are my functions. Any questions?
Maggie, can you talk to, Maggie does our website and all our social media. Can you just give us a brief explanation about how the voting will work on the 2 issues on the ballot and our deadline?
Oh, sure. As Vicki said, I do the website and send out the email blasts that you all get. And thanks so much for subscribing to it. It's really a joy to see people open that up. The way that we plan on doing this particular voting is through SurveyMonkey. Only the people who are members in good standing and who are attending this, and members who are attending this meeting will receive a ballot. You'll get that tomorrow morning after we verified the lists that we get through Zoom, and then we will send every one of you a ballot. You'll have until Saturday at 5 o'clock to fill out your ballot, accepting the board as it is, and to also vote on the bylaw changes. Hopefully SurveyMonkey will function the way it's always supposed to, which is to send you a reminder. But please do get your ballots in by Saturday at 5 o'clock at night.
I have a question, Vicki and Maggie. So is the board recommending that we approve these 2 issues that'll be on the ballot?
Yes.
Yes. Judith, let me just address the bylaw situation. As I mentioned earlier, the RNO has been around since the late 70s, and there's kind of a template everyone started with. And at different moments in time, there's a different level of engagement in the neighborhood, and some of the bylaws become unwieldy. Where we have a small board, we have a very cohesive board of people that volunteer and work together and support each other. But if we had a board of 50 people with 12 directors that were rotating every year, we would need a different kind of bylaw. So we updated them to reflect it. And most organizations do that every 2 or 3 years, just to pay attention to how they're functioning. But yes, we would highly appreciate you ratifying the changes we made. Any other ones? Jeff Harborough joined the board this year, and we're very excited about that. And we very much endorse him. He has been a very active neighbor for a long time. He was quite essential when we were working on trying to disseminate information about the ECAP. There were so many people, and I'm sure still are, who just were not aware of what was going on. It was really hard to give people a chance to participate, know. And Jeff was great at informing people, flyering neighborhoods, and he's been involved in Teller and Snow Angels. So Jeff, why don't you jump in and talk about why you want to be on the board?
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it, Vicki. So yeah, I'm excited about this opportunity to being on the board. I think my skill set can bring in a lot of help with driving the membership base up. And as you alluded to, I went out to the community last couple of years to speak with everybody door to door. And now that COVID's come along, that kind of put the kibosh on that. But now that we have the vaccine, and hopefully this will be a good sign that we can get back out, or I can get back out into Congress Park, speak with the owners and also the renters and hear their concerns and talk to them about joining the group. And I think that's really important, so everybody has a voice, and it will be a really good thing for everyone to come together for these meetings. So I'm really excited about being a point person in increasing the membership. Snow Angels is going extremely well. We've just had our first couple snowfalls and those houses were cleared. We're always happy to have more volunteers as we want to take on more houses. And this spring and summer, I'm going to start Yard Angels. And Yard Angels will be going out to the homes of people who can't maintain their bushes and their lawn anymore and help them with that. So I thought that'd be a nice little segue for Snow Angels to be also Yard Angels during the summertime. So thank you so much for listening.
Jeff, that's a great idea. Can I call?
Of course.
When things get overrun. So that really concludes the business side of the meeting. Does anyone have any questions about the election? Does anyone have any questions they want to ask of any of the board members?
We have another person who's come in. They've only identified themselves as owner. Could you please tell us your name, please?
Hey, Maggie, this is Shane Brady. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Yes.
Thanks, Shane.
I didn't know I came up as an owner.
Yeah, I'm just going to change your name for you. Thank you.
Okay. Boy, it took me a dickens of a time to get on.
Jane, I
It's a
saw
new
that.
territory.
Sorry.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to come in.
Yeah. Oh, perseverance.
So the ballot will be going out tomorrow morning. It's a yes or no vote on the board and on the ratification of the bylaws. If there are no other questions, I'm going to move that the business meeting be adjourned. And then we're going to have a presentation by Beth McCann, and that will be followed by a presentation from the auditor. So could I have a motion to adjourn the business meeting?
So moved.
Judith,
Yes, I
Right.
move that we adjourn the business meeting.
do I have
I
a
move
second?
also. I second.
Okay, so the meeting is
Somebody identify themselves so I can put it in the minutes.
Judith Cohen, Maggie Price, second.
Thank you.
Hi, Beth. Thank you
Hi.
so much for joining us tonight. We're looking forward to hearing from you about what's going on with the district attorney.
Sure. Thank you, Vicki, and thank everyone for taking your time to participate in registered neighborhood organization meetings. I think they're really important for our city and for our communities. So I appreciate the time that many of you have put in. It sounds like, Miles, I don't know what else you could possibly do besides all the things you're doing for Congress Park, but anyway, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the things that have been going on in the DA's office, some of the new programs that we have. I don't want to take too much time, but just talk about a few things I'm really proud of that we've been able to start since I was elected. So I'm going to start with our restorative justice program. I think I've spoken to you a little bit about this before, but how many of you are familiar with restorative justice? The ones I can see. Good. So as you know, it is a program that allows for a victim of a crime to actually participate in a conversation with the defendant in a facilitated setting. And there is discussion about what the impact of the crime has been on the person. And what we have found is that it is actually kind of more empowering for victims than simply going into court and not having any explanation about what happened or why it happened, nor any input into, well, there is input, but in the restorative justice context, the victim and the defendant actually work together with facilitators to come up with how the harm can be repaired, or how the community can benefit from something that the defendant does. And we just had a little fundraiser for our program and was quite successful, but there was a young woman who spoke about her experience going through the program, and what she talked about was how it made her take accountability for what she had done, and really realize the impact it had on the victim of her crime. In her case, it was a theft. And then they were able to work out a way for her to help repair that harm. So I've been really pleased that we started this program 1 year ago. So we've had 70 people go through it so far. I think we've had about 40 graduate or finish. And if they complete the program, then the case is dismissed. So they don't have we help them get their records sealed also, so they don't have a criminal record. And of course, we use it in appropriate cases. You know, certainly a lot of cases aren't appropriate for restorative justice, but a lot of them are. And I think it helps change people's lives in a positive way versus the traditional criminal justice system where there is no communication between a victim and a defendant. Another unit that I started that I'm very proud of is our human trafficking unit. We now have a full-time, one of my really outstanding attorneys, and 2 full-time investigators, a victim advocate, and a woman who does a lot of the outreach into the community. So if you have suspicions about human trafficking or questions, you know, just let me know and we can put you in touch. I can put you in touch with our human trafficking unit. We just indicted, I think it was 27 individuals that had been involved in several businesses, massage parlors, essentially, throughout the Denver area. And that was a really important indictment, and broke up kind of a human trafficking ring. we're working toward getting some legislation to regulate massage parlors. They're not regulated either in Denver or at the state level. Just individual therapists are licensed massage therapists, but the businesses are not licensed. So those of you who are familiar with how the city inspections work, when a company is being licensed or a business, then there are inspectors who can go in and make sure that they're complying with city ordinances and so forth. And that would provide a much closer view of what goes on in those massage parlors. So we really would like to see them be regulated. So we'll be working on that over the next year. And also, we started a pre-file adult diversion program. So that means that in, again, low-level criminal activity, if people don't have criminal records, if they qualify, we are allowing them to go into a diversion program before the case is filed. Again, in an effort to avoid people having criminal records when they are just entering the criminal justice system. We're really trying to provide treatment and support so they don't stay in the criminal justice system. And that program has been operational for almost 2 years now, and again, showing very good success. We are actually expanding. We got money from Caring for Denver, which is the foundation that was established through your all's vote in 2019 to increase the sales tax in order to provide funding for mental health and substance abuse treatment, particularly within the criminal justice system. So we are going to be able to expand that program. And then domestic violence has always been an interest of mine. And I found out, so when I was in the legislature, we passed a law that strengthened the law about firearms possession. If you have a protection order against you or domestic violence conviction, you are not supposed to be able to purchase or possess firearms. Well, when I came into the DA's office, I discovered that that was not being enforced. And so we now have a full-time investigator. It's called our firearms relinquishment investigator. And what he does is he goes through all the domestic violence cases as they come in for clues about whether or not there are firearms in the home. And the police are supposed to be asking the victims about that. So we often see it in the police report, or there's some reference to firearms. And that investigator then brings that to the attention of our domestic violence specialist attorney, and they take it up with the court and make sure that the court orders relinquishment of the firearms. And we have been successful in getting, last time I checked, about 60 firearms out of homes of domestic violence offenders. It's not a permanent, so we're not taking people's guns, but they have to turn them over to a storage situation like with Denver Police, or they can sell them, or they can give them to someone who can pass a background check, as long as they show proof that they've done that. And then as the case progresses, if they are not convicted, then they're entitled to get their guns back. But they took 19 guns from one house, if you can believe that. And they were, rifles. There were some rifles, some long guns. And we know statistically that women are much more likely to be killed in a domestic violence situation if there are firearms in the home. So I believe that we are saving lives with this program. And actually, we've gotten positive response from victims, as you might imagine, but also we got a letter from the father of one of the people whose guns were taken, or he relinquished, I should say, thanking us because he was concerned his son might commit suicide. So that's been a really a great development. We also have started an education initiative where my attorneys are going to middle and high school and talking to the kids about things like sexting and cyberbullying, things that they may end up getting involved in, explaining what the law is, answering questions. So I'm really pleased with that outreach. We've actually been able to do it even with COVID, since the kids are doing everything virtually. We do that too. And we have a town hall scheduled with parents and kids in January at East. So that'll be an interesting experience. And obviously, one of the biggest issues is race and the criminal justice system and how they intertwine. And of course, the protests this summer have really highlighted the issues of overrepresentation of people of color in the criminal justice system. So we have had, well, before the protests, I had already begun discussions in my office about racial bias. I bought the book, The New Jim Crow. I don't know if any of you have read it, but it is a well-written book about the impact of criminal justice on particularly young African-American men and the Black community. And it's, talking about when there was the big emphasis on tough on crime and drugs and kind of these really draconian sentences. Anyway, we had some discussion groups about that book within my office, and we brought in another speaker to talk about her book called Charged, which is about the power that prosecutors have. And we've brought in training on implicit bias and cultural competency. I think it's a very hard topic to talk about in the law enforcement community because people get defensive fairly quickly. And what we're trying to do is foster the ability to communicate openly in our office. We set up, we did some town halls, but there are 250 people in the office. So that's not conducive to really having a discussion. So we've separated people into groups of 10, and they are meeting and talking about various aspects of race and ethnicity, both internally and then externally as well. We have a number of people of color in the office, and we want to make sure that we are supporting them and making sure our office is a safe place. And I've established some committees to work on various pieces of that, like recruiting and retaining people of color in the office, and also a committee that's looking at questionable police conduct. Sometimes in our county court, especially where the misdemeanors are handled, the attorneys may discover something that they think might be an improper stop or police conduct that's racially tinged. And so we now are looking at those cases. We've dismissed them in the past, but we've never analyzed them and taken them to the Denver Police Department. So I've talked to Chief Payson about this relationship, and he is open to us bringing him cases where we suspect there was a racial component. And by the same token, we've told him to bring us cases where the police don't think that our deputies have done a good job. So I'm hoping that that will help foster more communication with the police and also with the community. I have 4 community advisory groups, and we meet monthly. I have one on law enforcement and community relations. I have one on immigration, mental health, and youth. So if any of you are interested, we meet monthly and we just kind of talk about what issues there are in criminal justice. And it's been very helpful to me. For example, through the Immigration Advisory Council, we were able to develop an immigration policy for our office. And with the mental health group, we educate ourselves about a lot of the things that are going on in the community, and particularly programs that other agencies are involved in with mental health. And there's some good things that are going on with our police department. We don't always hear about those, but they have a co-responder program where mental health workers ride with police officers, and they actually handle the calls when they are mental health oriented more than criminal. And Police Chief Payson has recently piloted a program called STAR, which is a very innovative program where an EMT and a clinical mental health worker are paired, and they have a van, and they actually respond without police to many calls now, like a suicide or someone loitering. Some of the cases where people will call in somebody sleeping on their lawn, and they actually have not had to call the police yet at all for the cases they've responded to. And that's about 700, it's over 700 calls. So I think it's important that we all know that there are a lot of efforts going on to address mental health and substance abuse. We're making progress, but there remains a lot to do. And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the protests are really making us in law enforcement be consciously thinking about how are we handling cases, how can we do a better job of restoring trust in the law enforcement community. So those are things that we're working on. I think I'll stop and see if we have questions, because I could talk about a whole bunch of things that we're doing that are positive. And by the way, we are still prosecuting criminal behavior, which is sort of our fundamental responsibility. And I'm sorry to say we have had an uptick in violent crime. As you probably know, our homicide rate is higher this year than it has been for several years. And we see a lot of assaults. I think that this, was based totally on no data, but I think that the COVID situation has contributed to that, because people are frustrated, they're anxious, they're depressed, and they often are, cooped up with family members, which can be wonderful, but can also be very stressful. And if people don't have good coping mechanisms, or they've lost a job and they're struggling, they're afraid, they're going to be homeless. Sometimes people end up drinking, doing drugs, and it is not healthy for them or for the community. So I'm sorry that that's happening, but we are seeing that over the last few months. Whereas in the beginning of COVID, there was a pretty sharp decline in criminal behavior. So anyway, I see let me see what's going on in the chat here, because maybe there's some questions. Yeah. Okay. Do you know if ketamine is being used by paramedics at the request of DPD to address so-called excited delirium? My understanding is that ketamine is not used in Denver, and has not been by Denver paramedics, and has not been used for some time, even before the Elijah McClain situation. That is my understanding, that ketamine is not used. And I think it's being examined now by a number of jurisdictions. Okay, I'd like to learn more about the community advisory meetings. Is there a website with more information? Thanks for your report out. I'll tell you what, why don't I send an email to Vicki with the list of the advisory groups. And if anyone, they're open. If anyone would like to join, I'd be happy to do that, have you join. What do you see? Okay. What do you see as our greatest challenges in the future? Miles, why did you ask me that? Well, I do think this issue of police behavior and trust between the community and the police is just going to continue to be a big challenge for us. I think we are very fortunate to have Chief Payson as our police chief, because he is open to new and innovative ideas. But there is a lot of distrust of the police department and law enforcement in general. And I think that it's important for us to try to reestablish that trust. That's going to be hard to do, because it's, deep seated. And I think that, as not just in the criminal justice context, but as a community, we really need to be thinking about how we can make sure that racial bias is minimized, at least. I think that, you know, as we're all concerned about the divide in our country and the ugliness that we have seen, I think that we need to really hope to come together. And I'm hopeful that with the new administration at the national level, we'll see more leadership around racial tension and racial bias. So I think that's going to, one of the, you know, the issues about that is there are no easy answers, you know, and that's why I think it's going to continue to be something that's out there that we need to address. But there are plenty of other challenges. Okay. Let's see, as a licensed professional counselor, I really appreciate your attentiveness to mental health in the criminal justice system. Yeah, that's also a very big challenge for criminal justice, is how do we do a better job with those who have mental health issues? And we are, I think the Denver County and district courts are adding staff. County court has added peer navigators, so people who have substance abuse problems or mental health issues who have overcome them or are in recovery. They are now hired, they've been hired by the county court to work with people who are in that situation. And we have also what they call forensic navigators in the felony court that work with people who are found incompetent to stand trial to try to address their needs. But we're nowhere near doing enough with the mental health situation. When people talk about defunding the police, you know, that's crazy, but I do think there's room for allocating more resources toward the prevention in the mental health area. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that once the city budget gets in better shape. We'd love to see the co-responder program expanded and replicated in the districts. It is in the districts now, and it has been expanded. It started with just 3 co-responders. I think it started about six or 7 years ago. Well, maybe that's not right. Maybe 5 years ago. Anyway, and they're now, I think they're almost 50 of them, and they are in every police district. I don't know that they're 24/7. But they are in every district now. It's funny because I think initially the police were, you know, kind of skeptical, like, okay, you want me to have a social worker riding around in the car with me? And once they saw, I think, how effective the social workers could be and how it alleviated some of their work, they're very positive about it now. So I think it's been handled very well. The people from Mental Health Center of Denver who started the program made a very sincere effort to gain the trust of the police department. And I think they've been successful in doing that. And I think the police recognize now that this is something that they embrace and like having mental health professionals with them. So, but I wouldn't be surprised if it gets expanded even more. And the STAR program is a pilot right now, and that they just got more money from Caring for Denver. So we're hoping to see that expanded as well. Okay, looks like that may be all the questions. So anyone else have any questions or thoughts? I'm always available. You know, you can just email me. Vicky's got my email. Or you can just go on, you know, my website and get the email. If you have questions or concerns, you know, just let me know. It's a wonderful neighborhood. I love living in Congress Park. I'm glad that you guys are active and engaged. And yeah, I hope everyone has wonderful holidays, even if they're kind of quiet this year.
Beth, thank you so much for your time this evening. That was really helpful. I think I was the most shocked when you said there was this law that wasn't being enforced. But I'm sure those are things that are out there. And I thank you for your attention and all your work. I really appreciate it. And thanks for being a neighbor.
Sure. Yeah.
Maggie, how are we doing? I see Sarah and Jeff are on here.
Great. Hi. Good
Hi.
evening. I'm waiting for Timothy. The auditor was waiting also to get accepted. Do you see him?
I can hear you. I can see you, Maggie. I think we're waiting to set up our screen share.
Great. I can.
I can see you, Sarah, and I can see others. I have
Excellent.
a blank screen for myself.
Excellent. Yes, here it is.
Okay.
Let me put turn that.
We have Tim O'Brien
Yes.
from the auditor's office and Sarah and Jeff. So thank you for joining us this evening and go ahead.
Okay, there I am. Thank you. And I'm Tim O'Brien, Denver Auditor. And with me is Jeff Garcia. He's an attorney that works for me. He's leads up a group of the auditor's office called Denver Labor. And I'm going to ask, when we get to that section of the presentation, I'm going to ask Jeff to take it from there. Also is Sarah Del Valle Ruiz, part of the communications team. And with that, I am ready to go. Next slide. So the auditor is an independent office from the mayor, from the clerk, from the council. Those are the 4 elected pieces of Denver city government. We're all elected at the same time, which is in May of, the last election was May of 2019, so the next one will be in 2023. There is some talk of changing the cycle to making it a November election rather than a May election, but that hasn't been decided upon yet. We're independent of one another. The council, there are 13 members of the council. They are all those seats are up at the same time. They aren't staggered, so that you have half of them rolling off one cycle and half of them rolling off the next cycle. And we are limited to 3 terms. What we do in the auditor's office is try to deliver independent, transparent, professional oversight to improve and safeguard the investment that you and I have made in the city and county of Denver. We do this on behalf of everyone who cares about the city, and I think that's a wide variety of people. Next slide. What we do is internal auditing, and I'll talk a little bit about that. We also have some labor wage laws that we enforce, and Jeff Garcia will talk about that. The last item there is that the auditor is the chairman of what is called an independent audit committee for the city and county of Denver. There are 7 people on that committee. They're independent of city government, but 2 of them are appointed by myself, 2 of them are appointed by Mayor Hancock, and 2 of them are appointed by the city council. Next slide. We've had some budget shortfalls in this year, 2020, and we will continue to have that in 2021. City employees have taken furlough days in 2020 and will take more furlough days in 2021. In 2021, it's really sort of tiered a little bit different, so that lower paid employees will take less furlough days and higher paid employees will take more furlough days. But this remote environment has not stopped the work that we're doing at all. In fact, I feel that our productivity might even be up because of the pandemic. And because people are, abiding by the advice that we get from our public health people and staying home and, not going to Christmas parties and things like that. But, when all you have to do is sit at home, maybe people work a little bit more than they need to. So our productivity has been fine. In 2021, we will be looking at some of the federal relief funding that the city is getting. And one thing that we want to make sure of is that the city is applying for the money that they should get reimbursed for and not asking to be reimbursed for things that they should not be reimbursed for. The other thing is that funding, if the money is not spent by December 30th of this year, it runs out, it's over. Now, that doesn't mean that the new administration in Washington couldn't, retroactively change that. But right now, what we're hearing from the federal government is that a lot of states, municipalities have not applied for all the relief money that's available. I had seen an article in a newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, that talked about some of the things that, and this wasn't done by an auditor's office, this was really done by the media in Illinois, but they asked under the Open Records Act for how some of those dollars were being spent. And, there were cities that were buying guns for their police department. I mean, like automatic rifles and things like that. I kind of think that was a stretch. Hand grenades, body bags, McCormick Place. I don't know if you're familiar with McCormick Place in Chicago, but they were renting out McCormick Place. I think they spent $100 million renting out McCormick Place, potentially to be, like a field hospital, but they never, the pandemic hasn't gotten quite to those levels. We're looking at, in 2021, how we can address the needs for the most vulnerable populations in Denver. Another concern that I have going into 2021 is that when budgets get tight, that sometimes the controls around those dollars get loose. And we want to make sure that the appropriate balance is maintained there. Next slide, please. This one is a little busy, but if you can see that gray line, that is the baseline projection for quarterly sales tax revenue in Denver. And you can see it was up over $170 million, at least projected by about this time. Now, obviously the pandemic changed things. Scenario 1 is the blue line, which is a little obscured until you get to the low point. That projection was really based off of the Great Recession, 2008, and what happened to sales tax revenues. And sales tax revenues did go down quite a bit. We haven't experienced quite the decline in sales tax revenue that the city did a dozen years ago. In 2008, 2009, they snapped back rather quickly. At any rate, in this sort of greenish line, scenario 2 was a revision to the sales tax collections and in May, or in July rather. That's the scenario for at that point in time. It looks a little bit better. It's going to get better, but it's really going to be about this time next year before we're starting to get back to where we were at the end of 2019. What the scenario, either none of the scenarios, well, the red scenario does anticipate, a virus resurgence. And at least so far, I don't think Denver or Colorado is experiencing the kind of resurgence that other communities around the country have experienced. In fact, I thought I just saw in the news this evening that, our hospitalization, the rolling 7-day average is going down a little. The infection rate is going down. I mean, I thought I saw it was at 8-point-something%, which, you know, there are states like North Dakota, South Dakota, you know, they're double digits plus. I mean, I thought some communities are in the 30 to 40% infection rate. So I hope that's because that we in Denver and in Colorado are following the advice that the public health officials have provided us. And so far, I think their advice has been pretty spot on. Next slide, please. The economic impact, I'm sure you know that, you know, the food service industry, restaurants are experiencing a significant decline, down almost 16% through July. Nationwide, it wasn't quite that bad. Small business open relative to January, we're down almost 22% and similar with the nationwide. So the pandemic has had quite an economic impact on Denver and on the country. Next slide, please. So we anticipated revenue to decline by 220 million in 2020. Significant drop equal to the entire budget for Parks and Recreation, community planning, the library, trash collection, public health, human rights and community partnerships, et cetera. I mean, it's significant. And the way that that is being managed by the city is that, you know, I mentioned the furloughs that all employees are taking. The city has frozen the hiring of any positions. That's a big part of the ability to narrow that $220 million gap. And we've also dipped into reserves. And I think, I know I have a slide ahead that will talk about the reserves. So why don't we, and next year for 2021, we're looking at a budget deficit of about 190 million. And again, we have reserves, we have positions that will be frozen, and we have the furloughs that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Next slide, please. Oh, marijuana sales tax. People seem to, they like to hear about marijuana sales tax. And you can see it's grown. In 2019, it was up over $40 million. And from what I've read, you can expect to see that number go even higher in 2020 because so many people are sitting at home. But while $40 million is a significant amount of money, there's no question about that, it's not enough to fill a lot of budget holes, certainly that have been created by the pandemic. But absent the pandemic, if Denver wanted to build or needed to build a new fire station, we could build a new fire station for $40 million, but you couldn't equip it and keep people in it for very long. So, so think of one fire station, that's a year's worth of sales tax from the marijuana industry. Next slide, please. I mentioned our general fund balance, our reserves, very healthy. I mean, in 2016, they're up around almost $400 million. And that's on a general fund revenue of about $1.6 billion. So, you know, we're in the neighborhood of 20 to 25% reserves, and 20 to 25% of our revenue in reserves. Now, that's great. When Denver has gone to the bond market over the years, and we have gone to the bond market recently, the investment bankers like that because that means that when we borrow money from Wall Street, that they are sure that the debt holders will be paid back because there are these strong reserves. Now, a bond indenture will include reserves, but these can be reserves that are above and beyond the bond indenture. In fact, as you can see, that has gone down a little bit, 2016, 17, 18, and 19. That's because some of those general fund reserves were set aside to strengthen the bond issues. And Denver has a AAA rated bond rating. Not many municipalities in the country have a AAA rated bond rating. But this enables us to continue services without a significant drop in the service level, without having to lay off people, without having to ask for tax increases from the public. So I think Denver has done a good job of managing its finances. Next slide, please. Denver International Airport. Most of the activity of government is accounted for in what's called the general fund. And the general fund accounts for everything except those things that are legally required to be accounted for in a different fund. And Denver International Airport, because it is an enterprise, is accounted for in a separate fund. It's called an enterprise fund. You can see 2019, we had revenue of 1.1 billion on expenses of less than half of that. The difference is what's available for debt service. That's a nice margin for a business, but the reason that you have a margin like that is that the airport is a very capital intensive operation. I mean, to build the airport cost over $5 billion, but it doesn't stop there. I mean, the runways need to be maintained. They need to be broken up and repaved. Recently, Denver, before the pandemic, was talking about building a 7th runway. We have 6 right now. We were talking about a 7th, and a runway will cost in the neighborhood of $1.5 billion. And that doesn't include the maintenance to go with it. By comparison, I don't know if you've ever been through London's Heathrow Airport. They have 3 runways. And what I think Denver, when we built the airport, 25 years ago, opened it 25 years ago, I don't know that we anticipated that we would become, quite the hub that we have become, and especially in this world where everything gets delivered to us. So, you have distribution centers, and airplanes come in, they unload, it goes to the distribution center, and our order that we placed this morning ends up at our front door, at noon tomorrow. I mean, it's really quite a changing world. And I think the role of the airport could change, from more of the cargo-based operations than to people-based, because while people like us will always want to travel on vacations, I think most of the revenue is generated by the business customer. And I think the business customer is saying, do we really have to travel as much as we do, given the technology that you and I are using right now? And obviously these numbers will change in 2020 because we won't have the kind of revenue that we had in 2019. And I thought I saw a question that came in about how will this impact the bond rating? The bond rating has been reaffirmed really just a few weeks ago as AAA. We went to the bond market to refinance some of the debt at a lower rate. And one of the refinancing, the new rate was less than 1%. So that's a great rate. As we borrow money for some of the projects that were authorized, I think in 2017, there's about $1.9 billion worth of bonds there. When you have a lower rate, that means that there are more dollars available for projects as opposed to paying interest. So it's kind of a win for Denver. So we're benefiting from some good management over a period of time. Next slide, please. Okay, in our audit services division, we have 41 employees, 9 CPAs, 7 certified internal auditors, et cetera. The big credential, the upcoming credential up there is 5 certified information systems auditors. You and I are all relying more and more on information technology, and so is the city and county of Denver, and we've got to have people with the right skills sets in order to audit those systems and make sure that they're secure, as well as operating as intended. So that's an important one. We are required to, by city charter, to audit in accordance with what are called generally accepted government audit standards. That's good because we should audit to a standard, but we have what's called a peer review every 3 years. We're due for one in 2021. And what happens is there's a team of individuals that are from other local government audit offices. They come in, or maybe they'll do it virtually this time, but they take a sampling of our audit reports and they take a look at what are called our work papers to make sure that the facts, the conclusions, the findings, the recommendations are really supported by the underlying evidence in those work papers. And I think that's an important part of what we do. And I think it should give the taxpayer, the citizen, assurance that audit reports are factual and meant to be oversight and not meant to be political in any way. Next slide, please. We have had some audit impacts. I really could list a lot of audits on here, but you know, public records, for example, it seemed like at the end of this audit, we realized that each department, each agency may have a little bit different way that they handle a request from the public for public records. And any public record is available to the public unless by law it is not available to the public. So some departments are pretty good, some aren't good, and we felt that the city could have a better centralized, more transparent way to deal with these kinds of requests. Preschool tax, that was a tax. There is a 1/4% sales tax that you and I pay in Denver. That goes to this preschool program, and that started, I think, in 2014. We took a look at the program, and that generates, roughly $25 million a year in revenue and sales tax revenue. They had $25 million in a money market account. And if you don't know, money market accounts are kind of like the earnings you get on your checking account, which is not very much. Why don't we go to the next slide? So we do financial audits, make sure the numbers are right. Performance audits, make sure that the taxpayers, or at least try to assure that the taxpayer is getting from the program what it should be getting. As I mentioned, information technology and cybersecurity are becoming a greater part all the time of the work that we do. We look at contract compliance to make sure that somebody that contracts with Denver is delivering what they were contracted to do. And data analytics and continuous auditing, really, those are opportunities for us to look at populations of data rather than doing statistical sampling. While we do statistical sampling on occasions, if I can look at 100,000 transactions rather than 100 transactions, we're going to look at the 100,000 every time. And it's proving very, it provides us with a better sense of what the higher risk transactions are, and I think that's good. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Garcia at this point, and I'll certainly be available to take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tim. So I'm the Executive Director of Denver Labor. My name is Jeff Garcia. Denver is very unique in the way that we address labor and labor laws. There's no other city and county in the United States that has its labor department under an elected official, which is in itself pretty unique. But the city's also taken a very progressive approach to protecting employees and safeguarding taxpayer dollars. We are regularly contacted around the nation for other cities to do the same kind of work that we're doing. Tomorrow, I'm actually meeting with the City of Aurora City Council because they want to adopt many of the same labor laws that we have. One of the biggest things that we're seeing right now in Denver labor is that although the COVID pandemic has affected our community, construction hasn't slowed down. The work that is being done by the city is actually being amped up. It's a way of kind of increasing the ability for us to have projects done in a timely manner and also support the economy. So the city's still building a great deal, and we're making sure employees are getting paid correctly, and we're also making sure that the economy has a good funding from a steady source. So a lot of the bond programs that we've already voted on are being rolled out much quicker. And so the staff at Denver Labor is making sure that those bond programs are being audited correctly. And when Denver's paying for labor costs, that money is actually going to employees and not going into somebody's pocket. One of the big driving forces is minimum wage right now. Denver Labor enforces 5 labor laws. And last year we started enforcing a citywide minimum wage. There's some controversy about it. Some people are for it, some people are against it. Our job isn't to set the minimum wage. Our job is to make sure that anyone who's asked to follow that law is in fact following that law. And we've found that we're actually able to get compliance just through education more than anything else. When we tell people what they need to do, most employers want to do the right thing. Why don't we go to the next slide? One of the other things that we do is enforce Denver's prevailing wage. Prevailing wage is the amount that the city will pay contractors when they do projects for the city. We also have a living wage and a contractor minimum wage that we enforce. But as you can see in a couple of these photos, the effect of prevailing wage to ensure that taxpayer dollars are actually being allocated to labor costs when we're paying for labor costs is huge. The picture you see in the top right corner is Tim giving a check to an individual who worked out on a construction project out at the airport, and he was actually being paid about half his wages for about 2 years. When we contacted him, he didn't believe that we actually had $70,000 waiting for him. His wife had to convince him to come in, and when we were told that the auditor wanted to talk to him about $70,000 check he had, he did not want to come into the office. He thought that was some way of us getting him to come in. But it was life-changing. I mean, that's a down payment on a house, that's putting your kids through college, that's paying off your bills. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're not asking anyone to pay anything more than what they're legally supposed to do, but we're making sure that people are obeying the laws. So let's look at one more slide. So Tim took office in 2015, and if you look at this chart, I love this chart. We did not change our budget or our personnel in a really profound way. What we did do was we added new processes, automation, how to use technology, how to use education, and how to use communication to make sure that people were doing the right thing. And someday we want that number that we are able to recover for employees to be 0, that everyone's following the law and that everyone's getting paid correctly the first time. But while people aren't following the law, we want to make sure that everyone who isn't getting paid is getting paid through our assistance. And we've done quite a good job moving from $84,000 in 2015 to more than $1 million returned to employees this year. And that's just through a lot of hard work and some very creative people who are trying to do the absolutely best for the city. So Denver Labor's here. If you know of anyone who might have been underpaid, have them reach out to us. If you know someone who may have worked on a construction project or worked on a city project and they weren't paid, have them reach out to us. Also, a lot of times we may recover for an individual and they never know it. So if you have someone who's worked for the city, or you may have worked for the city yourself, go to the auditor's page. On the auditor's page, there is a link that says, "Are you owed money?" You click on that, look through your name, and you'll find whether or not we may be holding a check for you. Right now, we're holding about 1,200 checks. And those are just people who've worked for the city and weren't paid correctly. Anyone who's worked for the city in the past, it takes a few seconds. I strongly encourage them to take the time to do that. I'm going to kick it back to Tim for the next couple slides, but if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay. Yeah, we've made a number of changes. In fact, the prevailing wage law that Jeff enforces with his staff, when I took office, I mean, in reading that particular section of the city ordinance, it really didn't make a lot of good sense at all. And the reason is that it was largely the same ordinance that was enacted in 1951. It had little substantive change to it. We took about a year meeting with people, the contractors, the developers, labor, the departments in the city that were impacted by it, and came back with another a new law that we're operating under today, and I think it's operating very well. We do ask for help from some local CPA firms and auditing firms. I think of not a CPA firm, but Denver has a defined benefit plan for its employees, and the liability for that plan is calculated by actuaries. The liability is really what is driving the funding. So if the liability is wrong, the funding is wrong. We had another actuary come in and take a look at that, and they did come up with roughly the same numbers. So we felt pretty good about the actuary that Denver Employee Retirement Plan is using. Outreach, I've lost count of the number of these meetings that I've been to, not just virtually, but in person. And the reason I do, it's over 250 since I took office. The reason I do it is because when I first ran for this office, and thank you for your vote if you voted for me, I had people say to me, I don't know what the auditor does in the first place, so how do I know you're going to do what you say you're going to do? And what I have done and made a significant commitment to is going out and telling people, you know, what it is that we're doing. And I think it is consistent with what I told people in 2015 and again in 2019, and what I tell people every day. We've created some internships and entry-level positions. That's worked well. We've had a good, you know, success ratio with interns. I mean, most of them come out of the area, whether it's Metro State or the University of Colorado, Denver. But I would say out of 10 interns that we've had over the past 3 years, we've probably hired 8 of them. I did not expect to be that successful in it, but it has been very successful. So we can go to the next slide. So I'm trying to keep my promise to you. We have a newsletter. Sarah will probably put that up on the chat box, how you can sign up for the newsletter. We're on all the social media, community meetings, Zoom meetings. We have annual audit plans. Those are on our website. We issue an annual report that'll come out about the middle of next month. And I think the audits that we do are substantive and they're impactful. I think, you know, the amount of dollars that we've been able to return to employees who have earned it is also significant and important. Next slide, please. And that's where we get to questions. So is that where I go to the chat box? I bet it is.
And Tim, Beth had a really great question, so you may want to look. She was asking about when reserves might be used and what situations our high reserves could be helpful in.
Well, certainly the kind of situation that we're in today is part of that. And, you know, I don't know if you remember 2014, there were some floods up in northern Colorado. That impacted Denver, and those reserves were tapped, you know, to pay for a lot of expenses that hit in Denver. Some of the reserves are really earmarked by the city for certain things. There are reserves that are required by law, such as the Tabor reserves. But yeah, the COVID is exactly what reserves are designed for. I think the policy debate about reserves is how high should they be? And, you know, before the pandemic, I would have said to you, they're high. I like that. The accountant in me, you always like more reserves, but the taxpayer in me could say, well, they're too high. And I think the city is saving my money and I'd rather save my money myself. So, so I hope that answers that question. What other questions do I have here?
And Tim, there's a question whether or not the group can ask questions verbally, and I don't think that there would be a reason why they couldn't.
Yeah, Let's go right ahead.
Okay, if you can hear me.
Sure.
Hello, Mr. O'Brien. My name is Miles, and you presented to the Mayor's Pedestrian Advisory Committee earlier this month about the sidewalk repair program. And I thought your analysis was very good and very astute in giving them direction. But I've also been participating with the East Central Area Plan on the steering committee for the last 3 years. And based on them using federal money to do the plan and the scale of the plan, at the first meeting, I asked the planners, what will you term a success? How will you measure it? How will we know? What will be valid in making your determinations? They could never answer the question. And during this 3-year process, I know a lot of money was spent on consultants, but continually we were having difficulty getting information from them. And I think it gets back to the process in which they engage, and the city planners have full power to either answer a question or not, or totally sidestep it. Have you ever reviewed their process and what best methods might be? And I was thinking, people were talking about reform for the neighborhood organizations. I was thinking about city planning might need some reform. It seems like they have a job and they're not really listening to the residents. They're just fulfilling their obligation to the city to pass the plan. And so I don't know if they have best methods. And I know a lot of money was spent on this, and I was questioning them along the way, and so it's very challenging, and the impacts are citywide. So have they ever been audited for process and procedures?
Not for what you're talking about. I mean, we have done audits of the Community Planning and Development Department, and I did speak to the East Area Improvement Organization in the last month. And one thing that we've noted going forward is that this is something that we want to, you know, that is a risk to the community in Denver. Stapleton has certainly worked out pretty well, but you know, Denver's talking about this green mile along the Platte River, which would be a huge undertaking. So I don't have an answer for you based on an audit, other than, you know, we take a look at this kind of feedback, and you know, when it comes to our putting together an audit plan for 2022, we will be considering, you know, the kind of input that, you know, we received.
Because also this is part of the NPI process, and they're going to roll this out across the whole city into perpetuity. So I think I'd like to request it if it's possible, but I think the amount of money being spent, and it seems the city's got a vision of what they want the city to look like, but I just think the residents have no idea what's happening. And then behind that, they're moving text amendments. So missing middle was put in Blueprint Denver, it's required. Missing middle is multifamily. They're now rolling out the group living, which is defining how many people live in a dwelling unit. And then they're doing it piece by piece. And then the next step is the Denver infill, about how many multifamily units they're going to place in a single family zoned lot. So it's more a question of the residents don't know, as opposed to, is it right or wrong? Yeah, it could be, maybe not. But it's, are they really informing the residents as to these changes, and no one's paying attention? That would be at least my point. And this is all city money, and these are multi-year programs. So it's really concerning.
I agree with you. And it does, it changes the neighborhood forever. So we will consider it as we go forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Miles might be interested in our transparency audit, which is in the 2021. And that has to do with public notice and how neighborhoods are informed about policies like this.
Right.
So it may not address objectively what you're talking about, but it will talk about the process. So that's something you may want to look forward to in the beginning of 2021.
Oh, thank you. That's excellent. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? tonight. Thank you so much, Mr. O'Brien and Jeff and Sarah, for coming. That was really helpful and very informative. And thank you, Beth. This was a really informative meeting. Neighbors, thank you for joining us tonight. And don't forget to look for your ballot tomorrow in your email. And please vote, hopefully to support our 2 requests. And I wish everyone a happy holiday, safe and healthy. Wear a mask.